The sun had just begun to set over the city of New York, casting a warm golden glow over the skyscrapers. The air felt alive with the hum of a busy world, but inside the United Nations building, things were far from peaceful. The Earth had recently been chosen as the location for the most important diplomatic meeting in history. Aliens from far-off galaxies had come to negotiate peace between their warring empires, and among them was Princess Leora, the powerful and mysterious heir to the throne of a distant planet. The man who had been chosen to act as the translator for the meeting was Thomas, an ordinary human who had no idea what he was getting himself into. A few months ago, he had been a regular diplomat, dealing with trade deals and international cooperation. But now he found himself face to face with the alien princess, a woman whose beauty and power were unlike anything he had ever seen. She stood tall and proud, her purple-blue skin shimmering under the bright lights. Her eyes, like twin stars, glowed with a cool intensity that seemed to pierce through the very air between them. The meeting had been long and tense, and Thomas could feel the weight of the situation in his bones. Alien dignitaries from all over the galaxy had gathered in a room that felt too small for so much power. There were murmurs of distrust and suspicion in the air, as the different factions eyed each other warily. But for some reason, Princess Leora had singled him out from the crowd, asking him to assist with some private matters. As the others discussed their issues, Leora and Thomas stood apart, a quiet space between them. She was different from the others. Her royal presence commanded attention, but she was also guarded, as if her true self was hidden beneath layers of responsibility and duty. Thomas had spent hours translating for her, listening to the burdens she carried. He couldn't help but admire her strength, her intelligence, and the way she seemed so out of place in this human world. He also noticed how lonely she looked at times, as if trapped by her own royal destiny. That's when he said it, without thinking. "We should get married right away, foreign princess," Thomas blurted, his voice lighter than he intended. It was meant to be a joke, a way to break the tension that had been building for hours. The princess looked at him, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, she said nothing, and Thomas immediately regretted his words. He had expected a laugh, a smile, even a sarcastic comment. But instead, she only gazed at him with those strange, glowing eyes. "I can't get married now," Leora replied softly, her voice holding a weight that sent a shiver down his spine. "There are things you don't understand, things that cannot be changed, no matter what I want." Thomas felt the shift in the air. What had started as a light-hearted remark had turned into something far deeper, something Thomas wasn't prepared for. He found himself speechless, wondering if he had crossed a line he didn't even know existed. The air between Thomas and Princess Leora was thick with silence. The words he had said, though meant in jest, had clearly affected her. She didn't laugh, didn't smile. Instead, she looked at him as if she was weighing something heavy in her mind. Thomas stood there, unsure of what to say next. The princess had always been a figure of power, and seeing her like this, vulnerable in a way, was unlike anything he had expected. Leora finally broke the silence, her voice calm but firm. "You don't understand, Thomas," she said, looking away toward the large windows that framed the sky. "Marriage is not a choice for someone like me. My people, my empire, they don't see it the way humans do. It's not about love, not about emotions. It's a bond, a political agreement that will shape the future of my people." Thomas felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had known that her position was complex, but he hadn't truly understood just how much weight her title carried. The idea of a princess marrying someone for politics, not for love, felt foreign to him. He had always believed that love was the foundation of any relationship, but for Leora, it seemed like the last thing that mattered. "Are you telling me that you can't ever choose?" Thomas asked, his voice soft. He couldn't help himself. He felt a connection to her, a bond that had grown over their conversations. "You don't have the right to decide who you marry." The princess turned to face him, her eyes filled with something Thomas couldn't quite name. It was sadness, but also something deeper, regret. Maybe. No, I don't, she replied. My life isn't mine. It belongs to my people, to the galaxy. The marriage I must enter into is not a choice. It is a necessity. I must marry the heir to the neighboring empire. Our families have been in talks for decades, and the union will bring peace between our people. It's the only way. Thomas didn't know what to say. He had heard stories of arranged marriages in other cultures, but this felt different. This wasn't just about two families. This was about entire worlds, entire empires, and the balance of power. He had known that Leora was important, but hearing the weight of her responsibilities made him realize just how far beyond his understanding her life truly was. He stepped closer, his heart pounding. But what about you? He asked. What do you want? What makes you happy? Lyra's gaze softened, and for a moment she seemed to be a different person. The princess, the ruler, the leader, they all seemed to vanish, leaving only a young woman, burdened by a destiny she never chose. I want to be free, she whispered, her voice barely audible. But freedom is a luxury I cannot afford. Thomas didn't know what to say to that. He wanted to help her, to somehow give her the freedom she longed for. But he knew it was impossible. The politics, the power, the weight of her empire, it was too much for any one person to fight alone. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about what Leora had said. I want to be free. Those words kept echoing in his mind. He had never thought much about freedom in the way she described it. To him, freedom was simple, living without restrictions, choosing who you love, where you go, and what you do. But for her, freedom wasn't a choice. It was something she could never have. The next day, during a break in the tense negotiations, Thomas found himself walking alone through the palace gardens. He needed space to think. The sky was clear, and the flowers around him bloomed in colors he had never seen before, strange plants from faraway planets. He barely noticed the beauty of it all as his thoughts focused solely on the princess. He had come to admire her strength and grace, but now he felt a deeper curiosity. He wanted to understand her, understand why she had to carry such a heavy burden. She wasn't just a ruler. She was someone caught in a struggle between her duty and her desires. As he walked, he found himself approaching the royal pavilion, where Leora was sitting, staring at the horizon. The golden sunlight bathed her in a soft glow, and for a moment she looked almost like a statue. But her eyes, filled with thoughts he couldn't reach, were alive. Princess, Thomas called out gently, not wanting to startle her. Leora turned toward him, her face softening slightly. Thomas, she replied, her voice calm but tired. What are you doing here? He hesitated. I was thinking about what you said, about your marriage, your duty. I don't understand. It just doesn't seem fair. She let out a small, sad laugh. Fairness is a human concept. My people don't believe in it the same way you do. Thomas took a step closer, his voice quiet but insistent. But it's not just about fairness, is it? There must be more to it. You don't have to live like this. I mean, you're a princess, you cold. Leora cut him off with a gentle but firm shake of her head. It's not that simple, Thomas. You don't understand the pressures I face, the weight of my family's expectations, the alliances I must maintain. It's all about survival, not happiness. It's never been about what I want. Thomas frowned. But what if you could choose? What if there was another way? Lyra's eyes softened, and she looked away, the thought clearly painful for her. There is no other way. You don't understand the consequences, the dangers. If I refuse, if I try to change things, my empire could fall. I could bring war to my people, my life. It's not my own anymore. Her words hit Thomas harder than he expected. He had known she was bound by duty, but hearing it from her, seeing the pain in her eyes, made him realize how trapped she truly was. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the conversation hung in the air. Thomas wanted to tell her that he would help, that he would do anything to free her from this life, But he knew the reality was much more complicated than that. "I just want you to be happy," he said quietly. Leora turned back to face him, a look of longing in her eyes. "I want that too. But sometimes, the world doesn't give you what you want." The days that followed were heavy with the weight of unspoken words. The negotiations between the two empires continued, but Thomas found it hard to focus. His thoughts were consumed by Leora and the conversation they had shared. The more he thought about her, the more he realized how little he understood the life she led. One afternoon, after a long meeting had ended, Thomas found himself alone with Leora again. She was standing by the window, her gaze lost in the distance. Her face was calm, but Thomas could see the tension in her shoulders. He hesitated for a moment before approaching her. "Princess," he said softly, "I can't stop thinking about what you said the other day, about your marriage and your duty." Leora turned to face him, her eyes tired but clear. She looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether to speak her true thoughts. "You really don't understand, do you?" she said, her voice gentle but firm. "What I told you isn't just about marriage. It's about the future of my people, the fate of my empire." Thomas frowned, feeling more confused than ever. "But you don't even get to choose, do you? You're forced into this life, forced into a marriage you don't want. That doesn't sound like a future worth living." Leora sighed and stepped away from the window. She walked slowly to the center of the room, as if gathering the strength to tell him something she had never shared with anyone. "I was born into this," she said, her voice quiet. "From the moment I was born, I was chosen to lead. I never had the chance to choose anything else. My parents, my ancestors, they all made sacrifices to build the empire. And now, it's my turn to carry that burden." Thomas listened intently, his heart aching for her. He had always known that leadership came with sacrifices, but he had never imagined that it could cost someone their happiness, their freedom. Lyra continued, her words slow and measured. "I don't even remember the last time I felt free. My whole life has been mapped out for me. My marriage isn't about love. It's about keeping the peace, strengthening the alliances that have kept my people safe for generations. If I refuse, if I try to break tradition, my empire could fall apart." Thomas couldn't understand why such a beautiful, strong woman had to carry the weight of a galaxy on her shoulders. To him, love and happiness should have come first, not politics or alliances. But as he listened to Leora's story, he realized that the world she lived in was different. The stakes were higher. The consequences were severe. "But what about your happiness?" Thomas asked, his voice filled with concern. "Doesn't that matter?" Lyra's expression softened, and for the briefest moment, she seemed vulnerable. "I gave up on happiness a long time ago, Thomas, but I haven't given up on my people. They need me. The galaxy needs me." Thomas's heart sank. He had hoped that there was a way for her to be free, to choose her own path. But now he saw just how trapped she really was. It wasn't just about her. It was about everything. Her empire, her people, and the future she was forced to build. "Is there any way out of this?" he asked quietly, his voice full of desperation. Lyra looked at him, her gaze distant. "No, there is no way out. At least, not for me." The days following their conversation were filled with unease. Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that Leora was slowly pulling away from him, not just emotionally, but physically as well. There was a distance between them now, something unspoken that neither of them could ignore. Every time their paths crossed, Thomas could feel the weight of her responsibility, pressing down on her like a stone. He couldn't understand why she had to carry so much. Why couldn't she just have a life like anyone else? Meanwhile, the diplomatic talks between the two empires grew more intense. Tensions were rising, and everyone could feel it. The stakes were higher than ever. The princess's marriage wasn't just a personal matter anymore. It was a symbol of peace or war. The political landscape was shifting, and the balance of power hung by a thread. One evening, after a particularly heated discussion between the alien factions, Thomas was called to a private meeting with Leora. He found her in the same quiet room where they had spoken before. This time, she wasn't looking out the window. She was sitting at the table, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if bracing for something. "Thomas, we need to talk," she said, her voice strained. Her usual composure seemed to be slipping, and Thomas knew something serious was about to happen. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. "The talks aren't going well." Leora looked at him, her eyes filled with worry. "No, they're not. The situation is escalating quickly. The empire I'm supposed to marry into, they're not as friendly as we thought. If the peace treaty isn't signed soon, the war could start again. It's already brewing on the horizon." Thomas's heart sank. He knew how dangerous things had become, but he hadn't realized how close they were to the breaking point. "I can't afford to make a mistake, Thomas. If I refuse to marry, the consequences will be dire. The peace we've worked so hard for could be destroyed. Millions could die." Thomas stepped forward, his heart racing. "But you're not just a tool for politics, Leora. You're a person, a woman with your own desires. You deserve more than this." Leora stood up quickly, her face a mix of frustration and pain. "You don't understand. I've never had a choice in any of this. I've been trained for this my entire life. To lead, to marry for the sake of my people. I can't just walk away from it. If I do, the entire empire could fall apart." Thomas stared at her, his mind racing. He wanted to help her, to somehow make her see that she had options. But the weight of her responsibility was too great. She couldn't escape it, no matter how badly she might want to. Lyra's voice softened as she spoke again. "I've spent my entire life preparing for this moment, for this marriage, and now I'm being torn apart. I don't know what to do." Thomas took a deep breath, trying to keep his emotions in check. He could feel the desperation in her words, the loneliness she was hiding behind her royal facade. He reached out and placed a hand gently on hers, looking into her eyes. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. "I'll help you. Whatever happens, I'm with you." Leora shook her head slowly. "You don't understand. Even if you want to help, there's nothing we can do. The decision has already been made for me." The words stung like a slap, and Thomas realized the full extent of her predicament. She had no escape. She was bound by duty, by promises made long before she was born. No matter how much he cared for her, there was nothing he could do to change that. The weight of the princess's words hung in the air like a heavy cloud. Thomas couldn't stop thinking about what Leora had said. She had no choice. Her life had already been planned out for her, and no matter how much he wished it were different, nothing he could say or do would change that. The empire she was bound to was too powerful. The alliances and peace deals were too fragile. And most of all, the people who depended on her were too many. Leora had always been the symbol of strength, but now, in this quiet, darkened room, Thomas saw her differently. She was trapped, caught in a web of politics, duty, and promises made before she had even been born. The woman he had come to admire was not free, not in any sense of the word. Over the next few days, tensions between the two empires reached a breaking point. The peace talks were falling apart, and the arrival of the alien fiancé, who was to marry Leora, only added fuel to the fire. His presence felt like a constant reminder of the future she could not escape. Thomas could see the strain on Leora's face as she met with him. The princess was not the same person she had been just days ago. She seemed distant, her smile forced, her eyes hollowed with exhaustion. Her every word felt like a farewell. And yet she was still here, still bound to the man who could never truly be hers. One evening, as Thomas walked through the palace corridors, he saw the princess standing alone in a quiet courtyard, looking out at the stars. The evening sky was clear, and the twinkling lights of distant stars seemed to echo her sadness. He walked up to her, not knowing what to say, but knowing he couldn't leave her like this. "Leora," he called softly. She turned to face him, her face expressionless. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" I couldn't sleep," he said, stepping closer. "I've been thinking about what you said, about your marriage and everything that's happening. I know you feel trapped, but I can't just stand by and do nothing." Leora shook her head. "There is nothing you can do. It's too late. Everything has already been decided." "But what if it's not too late?" Thomas pressed. "What if there's another way? What if we could change this? What if we ran away together? I'd protect you. We could find a place where no one could control your life." The princess's expression faltered for a moment, and for the briefest instant, Thomas saw something in her eyes. Hope. But it was gone just as quickly as it appeared. "No, Thomas," she said softly, her voice filled with sorrow. "You don't understand. I can't run. I can't leave my people, my responsibilities. If I do, everything will fall apart. My marriage is the only way to keep the peace. It's the only way to protect my people." Thomas's heart ached. He couldn't bear to see her like this, to know that the one person he had come to care for so deeply was so bound by duty that she could never be free. "Then you're just going to give up?" he asked, frustration rising in his voice. Lyra looked at him with a sad smile. "It's not giving up. It's accepting reality. I have no choice." She turned away from him and walked toward the palace doors, her figure fading into the night. Thomas stood there for a long moment, staring at the stars above. He had wanted to help her, to show her there was more to life than duty and politics. But now he realized just how far apart their worlds really were. Days passed in a blur of tension and uncertainty. The peace talks had completely fallen apart. The alien empire Leora was meant to marry into was now demanding that she return to their planet immediately. Her fiancé, a cold and calculating leader from the other empire, had arrived on Earth to finalize their union, and his presence only intensified the situation. Thomas couldn't just stand by anymore. The more he thought about Leora's situation, the more he realized how trapped she truly was. She was being forced into a marriage she didn't want, for reasons beyond her control. And no matter how much she tried to convince herself that this was her duty, Thomas knew that deep down, she didn't want this life. She wanted freedom. She wanted a choice, and he was determined to help her get it. One night, after the rest of the palace had gone to sleep, Thomas found himself standing outside the door of the princess's chambers. His heart was pounding in his chest. He had been thinking about this moment for days, and now he couldn't wait any longer. He had to do something. He knocked softly on the door, unsure of what would happen next. After a moment, the door creaked open, and Leora stood there, her expression unreadable. She was dressed in a simple gown, and her eyes were tired, as though the weight of the world had been resting on her shoulders for far too long. "Thomas," she said, her voice quiet, but there was a hint of surprise in it. "What are you doing here?" "I can't just stand by and let this happen, Leora," Thomas said, his voice firm. "You don't have to marry him. You don't have to do what they're telling you. There's still time. We can run away. We can escape this place and start a new life. Together." Leora stared at him for a moment, as though processing his words. Her face was pale, and there were dark circles under her eyes, evidence of the sleepless nights she had endured. She shook her head slowly. "You don't understand," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I can't just run. My people are depending on me. If I break the agreement, it will destroy everything. It's not just about me. It's about the entire galaxy." Thomas stepped forward, his heart pounding. "But what about you, Leora? What do you want? What about your happiness?" Leora's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. "I've given up on happiness a long time ago," she said quietly. "I've chosen my people over myself. I've chosen my duty." Thomas reached out, gently taking her hand. "But you deserve more than that," he said softly. You deserve to be happy, to live your life on your terms, not as a pawn in some political game. Leora closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. When she opened them again, they were filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. I can't leave Thomas. I can't abandon my empire. If I do, everything will fall apart. Thomas's chest tightened, but he refused to give up. I won't let you go through with this. We'll find a way together. We can make a new future. It's not too late. For the first time, Leora hesitated. She looked at him, her face torn between the duty she had always known and the possibility of something more, a life where she wasn't controlled by her title, her empire, or her responsibilities. I don't know what to do anymore, she whispered, her voice shaking. Thomas squeezed her hand, a silent promise in his eyes. Then let's figure it out. Together. The night was filled with uncertainty. The quiet hum of the palace felt oppressive, as though the entire world was waiting for something to happen. Leora and Thomas stood in the middle of her chamber, the weight of their conversation hanging in the air between them. They had just spoken of escaping, of finding freedom in a world where duty and tradition had held them captive for so long. But as much as they both wanted it, neither of them knew how to make that dream a reality. Leora's hands trembled slightly as she looked at Thomas, her mind torn between the life she had always known and the chance for something different, something that could be hers. Thomas, on the other hand, couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. Every moment they waited, every second they spent talking, was a second closer to the moment when she would be forced into a life she didn't want. I don't want to lose you, Leora, Thomas said quietly, his voice full of raw emotion. He had never felt this way before, not for anyone. He couldn't imagine a life without her now. Leora closed her eyes for a moment, her face softening. I don't want to lose you either, she whispered, the words barely escaping her lips. She was scared. She was scared of what would happen if she chose to follow her heart. She was terrified of the consequences, the backlash from her people, and the destruction it could bring. But at the same time, she couldn't deny the truth that was growing inside her, a truth that had been there all along, hidden beneath the weight of her responsibilities. She didn't want to marry for politics. She didn't want to be a tool used to hold an empire together. She wanted to make her own choices, live her own life. I've been trained to be a ruler, she continued, her voice steady now. I've been raised to lead. But being a leader doesn't mean I have to give up my humanity. I want to live, Thomas. I want to be free. But I don't know if I can just walk away from everything I've ever known. Thomas reached for her hand, gently pulling her closer. You don't have to do this alone. I'll be by your side. Whatever happens, together, we can face anything. For a long moment, they stood there, the world outside the palace walls seeming to fade away. All that mattered now was the connection between them, the shared understanding that no matter the cost, they were ready to fight for the life they both dreamed of. But then, the sound of footsteps echoed through the hall, drawing them back to reality. Leora's eyes widened in panic, and Thomas's heart raced. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. The decision they were about to make wasn't just about them anymore. It was about the fate of two empires, the future of Leora's people, and the sacrifices they both might have to make. They're coming for me, Leora said, her voice tight with fear. It's time. I can't run anymore. Thomas's heart dropped. This was it. The moment of truth had arrived. He knew that if they stayed, Leora would be forced to marry the alien fiancé and fulfill their duty. But if they ran, they would be hunted, their lives thrown into chaos. There was no going back now. Then we'll go, Thomas said firmly, squeezing her hand. We'll face whatever comes together. I won't let you go through with this marriage. We'll find a way to make it work. We'll figure it out. Leora looked at him, her expression torn. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that they could escape it all, but she wasn't sure if she had the strength to take that first step. But then, as she looked into his eyes, she realized she had already taken that first step. She was ready. Without another word, She nodded, and together, they turned toward the door, ready to face whatever came next. The tension in the air was suffocating. Thomas and Leora stood at the edge of the palace courtyard, looking out at the moonlit path that led into the dark forest beyond the walls. The night was their only ally now. They had decided to run, to escape the life that had been forced upon her. But even as they took the first steps toward freedom, Thomas knew that they were running toward danger, not away from it. The Empire would not let Leora go so easily. As they moved deeper into the shadows, the sound of distant voices reached their ears. The palace guards were on high alert. They knew the princess was missing. They knew she had been talking to Thomas, and they knew they had to stop her from leaving at all costs. "How far do you think we can get?" Leora whispered, her voice trembling slightly. She was nervous, but there was also a flicker of hope in her eyes, something she hadn't felt in a long time. She had never imagined her life could change like this, that she could take control of her future. "I don't know," Thomas admitted, his grip on her hand tightening. "But we'll get as far as we can. We just have to keep moving. We can't let them catch us." Leora nodded, the weight of her decision pressing on her chest. She had always known that running was dangerous, that it might lead to more trouble than she could handle. But she couldn't stay. She couldn't marry a man she didn't love and live a life that wasn't hers. She had to try for something better, even if it meant risking everything. They moved through the dark corridors of the palace grounds, careful not to make a sound. Each step seemed to echo in the stillness, making their escape feel like a dream that could shatter at any moment. "Do you think we'll make it?" she asked quietly, her voice full of doubt. "We have to," Thomas said, determination in his voice. "We don't have another choice." They reached the edge of the forest, where the trees loomed like dark giants in the night. The moonlight barely pierced through the thick branches above, casting the path ahead in shadow. It was the perfect place to hide, but it was also dangerous. The forest was vast, and they had no idea where it would take them or who might be waiting for them in the shadows. Suddenly, a loud shout broke the stillness of the night. "She's gone. Find her." It was the voice of one of the palace guards. They had been discovered. The chase had begun. "Run," Thomas shouted, pulling Leora along as they darted into the trees. The sound of footsteps and shouting grew louder behind them. They could hear the guards moving through the forest, their torches flickering in the distance. But Thomas and Leora didn't slow down. They pushed forward, their hearts pounding in their chests. As they ran, Leora felt something shift inside her. She had never known freedom like this, never known the kind of power that came from making her own choices. It was scary, but it was also thrilling. For the first time in her life, she was doing something for herself. She wasn't a princess or a ruler anymore. She was just a woman running toward a future that she could create. But they couldn't keep running forever. Thomas knew that. They had to find a place to hide, somewhere the Empire's soldiers wouldn't think to look. "We need to get to the outskirts of the city," Thomas said, his voice low and urgent. "We'll find a place to hide until we can figure out what to do next." Leora nodded, her eyes focused on the dark path ahead. They were both running, not just from the Empire, but from the life they had been forced to live. And for the first time, they were free. The forest felt endless as they ran, their footsteps quick and frantic on the uneven ground. The moonlight barely touched the path, leaving them to rely on their senses to guide them through the dark woods. Every crack of a branch, every rustle of leaves, sent a shock of fear through Thomas and Leora. The Empire's soldiers were close. They could hear their shouts echoing in the distance, growing louder as they closed in. Thomas and Leora had no time to stop. They kept running, pushing their bodies as far as they could go, knowing that if they slowed down for even a moment, they would be caught. They didn't speak, only focused on the path ahead, trusting each other to stay together. There was no turning back now. They had crossed a line, and the only way out was forward. After what felt like hours of running, They finally emerged from the thick trees into a small clearing. The night was quieter here, and the shadows felt less suffocating. They paused for a moment to catch their breath, the exhaustion heavy in their limbs. Lyora's face was pale, but there was something different in her eyes, something brighter, as though the weight of her duty was lifting, even if only a little. "We need to keep moving," Thomas said, panting. His heart was still racing, but now there was a sense of urgency mixed with something else. Hope. Lyora nodded. She looked around the clearing, then down at the ground. "Where do we go from here?" she asked softly. Thomas paused, trying to think through their options. They couldn't stay here. It was too close to the palace, too close to the Empire's reach. But they had to find a place far enough away to disappear, a place where they could figure out their next steps. "I know a place," Thomas said after a moment. "It's not far, and no one will think to look there." Lyora looked at him, her expression uncertain. "Are you sure?" He nodded. "I'm sure. We just need to trust each other." They turned and moved quickly, walking through the forest with purpose now. There was a new sense of freedom in their movements, something that made their hearts lighter, even if the danger was still all around them. They were running away from their pasts, from their duties, and the lives that had been forced on them. And for the first time, Lyora felt a flicker of excitement. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, it felt like it could be her future, a future she could choose. After some time, they reached a small, hidden cabin that Thomas had once used during his days as a diplomat. It was in the middle of a quiet valley, surrounded by hills and trees. No one came here unless they knew it existed. It was the perfect place to hide. Lyora stepped inside first, glancing around at the simple room. There was a small fire burning in the fireplace, and the cabin smelled of old wood and earth. It felt peaceful, like a place where they could rest and think. Thomas followed her in, closing the door behind them. They both sat down by the fire, and for the first time in what felt like forever, they were alone with their thoughts. "We made it," Lyora whispered, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Thomas looked at her, a sense of relief washing over him. "We did. But this is just the beginning, Lyora. We have a long road ahead of us." She nodded, her eyes full of determination. "Then let's face it together. Whatever comes next, we'll handle it. Together." For the first time in a long while, Lyora felt a sense of peace. The future was uncertain, but it was hers to shape. And with Thomas by her side, she knew she could face anything that came their way.